and author Ariva Martin for more on this case. Ariva, we see the video of the police on top of Elijah McClains using that chokehold to subdue him. He's pleading for his life. Does that look like a crime?
No, Kenneth, the video is disturbing on so many levels. You hear this young man, as you said, pleading for his life, saying, I don't have a gun, I don't do that kind of stuff. And I think what really alarmed me in the first instance, what you heard the officer say to Elijah, I'm stopping you because you look suspicious, not because I believe you have committed a crime or there's probable cause with respect to any kind of crime being committed, but because you look suspicious. And that is just, completely inappropriate for the stop in the first place. And we see the stop turned very violent, very deadly, very quickly. Justice for this family is long overdue, but at least now these officers and these paramedics are going to be held accountable.
This also brought awareness about paramedics giving sedatives like ketamine to potential suspects. How do you think that fact will play into this case?
I think that's, again, a really troubling fact as it relates to this case. There's no explanation. We have nothing from these paramedics as to why they would choose to give this young man a sedative. He was already placed under arrest. He's in handcuffs. So why the need to inject him with a chemical that's used primarily in surgical procedures? So no explanation for the conduct. And the fact that the police union or anyone would try to justify the behavior of the officers and the behavior of the paramedics is just galling. We learned a lot from the trial of Derek Chauvin. We learned how dangerous chokeholds are. We learned how dangerous it is to have someone in a prone position. In this case, it's just another example of an unarmed African-American man killed by police for no apparent reason.
And we're still learning the facts of this case, but there also seems to be that disputed question about whether McClain tried to grab an officer's gun. You mentioned there that he was unarmed. Is that key to this whole case?
Well, what we know from the grand jury and these indictments is that testimony or those allegations by the police officers was found not credible by the grand jury. If the grand jury thought that Elijah had tried to grab a gun from an officer and that these officers were somehow acting in self-defense or were defending themselves, then I don't think we would have seen the indictments today. I think the statements made by these officers has been determined by this grand jury to be completely non-credible. We'll see what happens at trial if they take the stand and try to give similar testimony. But at this point, we know the grand jury found sufficient evidence to issue indictments for not only 3 officers, but 2 paramedics.
As we highlighted during the Chauvin George Floyd case as well, and during that trial, it is very difficult to prosecute and convict a police officer in this country. Obviously, paramedics are involved in this one as well. But which side do you think will have an easier time here proving the case, the officers and the paramedic or the prosecution?
Well, I think things are changing, not nearly at the speed, Kenneth, at which we would like to see them change. And you're right, historically, it's been very difficult for prosecutors to file charges and then for even juries to convict officers once they are charged. But I think there's been a sea change shift in the way America looks at these kinds of cases, in the way that prosecutors look at these kinds of cases. I think the days are long gone of officers being able to make statements that are not corroborated by the evidence and to use those statements to absolve themselves from liability and accountability. So I think based on what we see today, the evidence had to be pretty strong that was presented to the grand jury. And I'm hoping that evidence holds up in a court of law and that we see convictions for not only the officers, but the paramedics that were so brazen in giving this young man a shot of this really strong medication that clearly wasn't warranted.
All right, Ms. Ariva Martin there. Thank you for your insights.
Thanks, Kenneth.
Okay. All right. See, the fact of the matter is finally these animals are going to be charged. That is the I'm glad it's happening, because these cops, it was cops that when at the site where he was killed, they were taking, pictures and, smiling and stuff like that. And it just goes to show how strong racism is in the police department, how it's in the paramedics. And it's not a joke. And then you'll have the conservatives laugh it off, But he sure weren't laughing when Ashley Babbitt was shot for being a terrorist, a real criminal. Officers and paramedics are charged with Elijah McClain's 2019 death in Colorado. Denver, Colorado Attorney General said Wednesday that the grand jury indicted 3 officers and 2 paramedics in the death of Elijah McClain, a black man who was put in a chokehold and injected with a powerful sedative 2 years ago in suburban Denver. The 23-year-old's death gained widespread attention during last year's protests against racial injustice and police brutality following the killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis. McClain's pleading words that were captured on police body camera: "I'm just different. I've been posted on signs at protests and spoken by celebrities who have joined those calling for the prosecution of the officers who confronted McClain as he walked down the street in the city of Aurora after a 911 caller reported he looked suspicious." Where's that 911 caller? Why isn't that person being brought up? Where is that person? That's what I'd like to know. Where is that person? Stories about McClain, a massage therapist, family, and friends described as a gentle and kind introvert, filled social media, including how he volunteered to play his violin to comfort cats at an animal shelter. Attorney General Phil Weiser said all 5 officers and paramedics were charged with manslaughter and criminally negligent homicide, while some also face additional charges. Facing pressure during nationwide protests last year, Democratic Governor Jared Polis ordered Weiser to open up a new criminal investigation, as the district attorney had said in 2019 that he could not charge the officers because an autopsy could not determine how McClain died. That's a that's a lie. That's a lie. Okay? And Jared Polis, needs to be kicked, not be reelected as governor. Because if it took pressure for this to happen, for him to do his job, when he should have been pressuring, forensics, the autopsy, whoever was doing the autopsy, do your job right or you're fired. See, these politicians don't really give a damn about being elected. And you know how racist they are, if they don't give a damn about doing the right thing. It was one of the several investigations prompted, at least in the part of McClain's death, including separate reviews of McClain's arrest commissioned by the city of Aurora and a comprehensive review of the police department. The Attorney General's office also is conducting a civil rights investigation into the agency, the first under a new police accountability law in Colorado. This is it's sad, man. It really is how they have to do this. Aurora's highly critical review did not find any evidence to justify officers stopping McClain as he walked home from the store on August 24th, 2019, after a 911 caller had reported a man wearing a ski mask and waving his hands who seemed sketchy. His family said McClain wore the mask because he had anemia and that caused him to get cold easily. Police body camera video shows the officer getting out of his car, approaching McClain on the sidewalk and saying, "Stop right there, stop. I have a right to stop you because you're being suspicious." In the video, the officer puts his hand on McClain's shoulder and turns him around and repeats, "Stop tensing up." As McClain verbally protests, the officer says, "Relax, or I'm going to have to change the situation." Change the situation. As the other officers join in to restrain McClain, he asks to let them go and says, "You guys started to arrest me and I was stopping my music to listen." All right. He stopped his music just to hear what you were saying, and you decide to torture him. What happened next isn't clear because of all the officers' body cameras came off as they moved McClain to the grass, but the officers and McClain can still be heard. And officers says McClain grabbed one of their guns. McClain can be heard trying to explain himself and sometimes crying out, sobbing he can't breathe, and was just on his way home. I'm just different. That's all. That's all I was doing. I'm sorry. I have no gun. I don't do that stuff. I don't do any fighting. Why were you attacking me? I don't do guns. I don't even kill flies. Don't eat meat. I'm a vegetarian, he said. One officer eventually retrieves his camera, which shows McClain handcuffed laying on his side, periodically vomiting, as another officer leans on him. An officer who arrived later threatened to get his police dog to bite McClain. Paramedics arrived and injected 140-pound, 63.5 kilogram McClain with 500 milligrams of ketamine, more than 1.5 times the dose of his weight. The fire department is allowed to use the drug to sedate, combat, or aggressive people, but there's a lack of police training, conflicting medical standards, and non-existing protocols that have resulted in hospitalizations and even deaths when it's used during police encounters. So with this history, why would you use the ketamine? Within 5 minutes, according to the federal lawsuit from McClain's family, he stopped breathing. He died 6 days later after being declared brain dead and taken off life support. A pathologist who conducted an autopsy said a combination of a narrowed coronary artery and physical exertion contributed to McClain's death. Dr. Stephen China found no evidence of a ketamine overdose and said several other possibilities could not be ruled out, including an unexpected reaction to the ketamine or the chokehold causing an irregular heartbeat. The category hold that was used on McClain involves applying pressure to the sides of the neck, stopping the flow of blood to the brain, and to render someone unconscious. It has been banned by police departments in some states, including Colorado, following Floyd's killing. A lawsuit from the family alleges that McClain died as a result of dramatic increase of lactic acid in his blood caused by excessive force and use by police over about 18 minutes. Combined with the effects of the ketamine, they claim that police continued to torture McClain even after he was restrained. Treatment, they say, is a result of the department's history of unconstitutional racist brutality. The Attorney General's announcement comes after 3 hours after 3 Aurora officers, including one involved in the encounter with McClain, was fired and one resigned last year over photos mimicking the chokehold used on the 23-year-old. I wonder what these back to blue people want to say about this. The department's new chief, who's fired those officers as its interim leader, has vowed to work to rebuild public trust since McClain's death and other police encounters with people of color. However, Vanessa Wilson spent her first days as chief last year apologizing after Aurora's put 4 black girls on the ground and handcuffed 2 of them next to a car that police suspected was stolen, but turned out not to be. So you had clowns like this before. Why didn't you fire those cops who did that? A prosecutor later decided that there was no evidence the officers committed a crime, but urged the police department to review its policies to ensure that something similar does not happen again. In July, an Aurora police officer was charged with assault after being captured on body camera video, pistol whipping, and choking a black man during an arrest. Another officer was charged with not intervening as required under the police accountability passed during last year's protest. Yeah, there should be a law. It should be illegal for a police officer to take off his body cam. Illegal. This is crazy, man. It's insane. But I hope they are charged and they're found guilty. That's what I hope, because charged doesn't mean that they still can't get away with their nonsense. All right. Tell me what you think in the comments. Like, share, comment, and subscribe. Later.